All right, everybody. I'm going to bring us back to some of what we heard yesterday morning in looking at impaired waters, 303D issues within California. I'm going to roll into some TMDL implementation discussions, barely touch on our standards development process, and then conclude just with a little information about how some of the resources that we have for working with tribes. All right. So, remember way back to yesterday morning when Dave was talking about the integrated report process. I just want to talk a little bit about what we have going on in California, starting with where you can find more information about California's impaired water bodies. This is a screenshot from our integrated report water quality assessment webpage. Many thanks to Lori Weber and Tatiana, both of whom I do not see in the room right now, who have put some good effort into making this a little bit more user-friendly. There's a few really nice pieces here that you might want to just know that are here. You have a nice link to the listing policy, a nice link to what our current integrated report is, and all of the other cycles that have happened and are happening. Basic information about how to get data into the CEDN, the California Environmental Data Exchange Network, and some other related programs. So it's a pretty helpful website.
There's also the Integrated Report Wiki, which has a lot of information too.
That's a great addition, thank you. And since you guys are pretty much all water board staff, you'll have access to it. And if you need to, after this, I can show you how to get to that.
And I don't know if Christine wants to talk about the SOPs that are being developed. Is Christine here? That's going to be on, I believe that's going to be on SharePoint, but that's another resource for folks who work on integrated report that's being developed.
Right, so we're developing SOP, standard operating procedures, and also trying, one big piece of that also is some assessment methodologies for some of our harder to assess pollutant parameters. We just did one for mercury and fish tissue. We're working on one for water quality, for temperature. So we're trying to make it clear for all of us who assess data, like some nice flow charts and steps for how to do that. I wanted to talk just a little bit about the current 2014-16 list. It was a combined list. We did the two cycles, 14 and 16. It was approved by EPA in April of last year, and we are currently working on now the 2018 one. This is a slide Terry showed previously. It is, if you want to find what is currently considered a listed water body, this is a really nice place to go. It's a clickable, zoomable map. You can search by county, you can search by water body, and you can pull up from there the decisions and lines of evidence that really lay out why we decided to list or delist a water body, or to not list or not delist a water body. So it really is the place to go if you want to find out the specifics about any one of your impaired waters. So you might be wondering why the current list is a 2014-16 combined list when now we're sitting here in 2019 and we're supposed to be getting these to EPA on April 1st of every even-numbered year. It's because California just has so much data that we have just not been able to analyze all of it and get it through our public procedures and our public process in a time period that would allow us to get it done every 2 years. So in order to help us better manage all of the data that we have, we split the state apart into three different pieces, 3 regions to each piece. And those, as you can see, those 3 regions then are kind of the primary regions that are assessing their data for a particular cycle. And you can see where your region falls right now. I want to highlight that a region that is not on cycle still has the ability to look at any data that they want to look at, to assess it, and to do an integrated report for the year that they are off cycle. And I think for the 2018, which we're currently working on, I think we only have one region that is not doing some sort of off-cycle assessment. So it's becoming pretty widespread because it is hard to wait 6 years between when you're really looking at some high priority data. So how long does it take? How long does it really take us to do this? It takes us about 4 years is what we've been finding. From the point at which we put out a notice requesting data to be submitted for our consideration to the point at which EPA approves, it's about a 4-year period of time. And a lot of it takes time to look at all of the data, yes, but it also takes a significant amount of time to go through a regional water board consideration process and then to the state water board as well. So and I think that that's a good thing. I know it does take time, but I think it's really important for us to be getting the information out to our stakeholders in the watershed so they know what the condition is of their waters, so they know if they have an impairment, so they start thinking about what actions can be taken to address it. So it is a challenge as far as the time and the work commitment goes to bring this through the public process, but I think in the end it really does help us as far as water quality goes. So I mentioned that we're now working on the 2018 cycle. We are at the point of the regional board approval process for 2018. We are tentatively looking at a fall 2019 state board adoption fall 2020 state board adoption for the 2018 list. And then we are also now working on the 2020 cycle. We just closed the data solicitation period last week for the 2020 cycle. And we are going to start picking up the 2022 cycle this fall when we release our data solicitation notice for it. So the only way that we are going to catch up so that we are actually having the state board consider an integrated report in the year that that integrated report should be considered is by doing about 3 cycles at once. So we're going to be juggling for a little bit until we catch up, and I hope to be caught up by 2024. That's my goal.
Just to clarify, 2022 notice you're expecting to do in fall 2019.
Correct.
Thank you.
Whoops. I also want to just mention that the state board, or the regional board and the state board consideration is just of the 303D components of the integrated report. It's not the 305B pieces. So just that nuance to consider. All right. So as with many of our programs, we have a policy for it. So we have the listing policy as a statewide policy that explains our statistical analysis for when we are looking at data, which we call the binomial distribution or binomial approach. And it basically, in essence, allows about a 10% exceedance of a standard, of an objective, to be in place. And if it's less than 10%, we would not consider the water body impaired. If you exceed more than 10% of the time, we would consider the water body to be impaired. So that's broken out in our listing policy. Policy also contains what we consider to the process for determining what is readily available data, all of our reporting, and the process that goes with it. And I have a copy over there if we want to go through it, and then the link is available. I also want to highlight the categories that we put water bodies into again. You saw this yesterday morning when Dave was presenting. He did a version of this table. And there are some slight differences in California, I think primarily pertaining to categories 2 and 3. And I had my homework assignment this morning I didn't do was to actually do that side-by-side comparison. But I think it's 2 and 3, right? That California's a little different than the federal level? N1 as well. Any questions on this? I know I'm very much high-level glossing over. Cynthia?
Do we have a 5C listing for our alternative TMDLs?
A 5C?
No, something that notes that we have an alternative TMDL going on.
I think it would be a 5 alt, would be the terminology, and I
think that's for a particular pollutant water body combination and not necessarily, these are water body categories, so that's at the pollutant water body level. Whereas this is for the overall water body. So if the overall category, if there's an impairment, it would be in category 5, and then the 5 alt would just refer to the method for addressing the pollutant. But Terry, correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, you're absolutely right. And the 5A, 5B, 5C, when Nick was the 303D person, basically said these are not categories, they're TMDL status. And I think that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
So for each pollutant that's in, category 5, some have TMDLs done, some don't need a TMDL, some have different plans.
And Lori, sorry to interrupt, Rebecca. Lori presented a really nice chart at our integrated report TMDL roundtable that clarifies this. And even for myself, somebody who's been involved with it for a while, it is confusing. And so if anybody wants to see that graphic, because I think it really does help explain the difference between these status and categories, send me an email and I can share that presentation with you.
So a little bit of what's being discussed right now is the fact that a whole water body, say the American River from this bridge to that bridge, whatever your reach is, right? That whole water body for all of its pollutants is grouped into one of these categories. And you may have just one pollutant that is considered not attaining your standards, and that could bring you into category 5, needing a TMDL, even if the rest of your pollutants are showing that you are attaining standards. So we just group all of those pollutants into how is this water body doing. But most of us, as we're thinking about this, think about this in terms of a water body pollutant pair. So we're thinking about the American River for E. coli, for example. And then you also kind of want to say, okay, for that one, we don't have a TMDL yet, so it's in category 5, but we may have one for mercury in fish tissue that's in category 4A because we have a TMDL in place. So it's just something to be aware of that I think many of us, as we do this work, think about this categorization process in terms of water body pollutant pairs, but really it is a grouping of all of those pollutants into one water body. And it's kind of the TMDL status that is helpful to think about in terms of, for that pairing, where does it sit?
And Rebecca, if you want me to give you your homework, I have the differences right here, or should we just skip it?
For what?
For the differences between the EPA categories
Yes,
versus.
go for it, Jessie.
Category 1 for EPA is all designated uses are met. Category 2 is some but not all designated uses are met. And category 3 is cannot determine if any designated uses are met. And part of the reason that we changed the definition in California is because of the way that we do our reporting and the use of our database, because we weren't assessing, as an example, if COM was one of your uses and you didn't have any tissue data, there was no way you could get into category 1, even if every other pollutant that you assessed for was showing that beneficial uses were supported. So we changed the definition because we had no water bodies that were ending up in category 1, because there was really no way to say all uses were met unless you had every type of data to assess every single assigned use.
Thank you. Before Jason, I take your question, I want to get back to Cynthia, yours in regards to do we have any TMDL alternatives, 5 alts for a water body pollutant pair in California? And I don't know the answer to that. So I'm going to throw it out to those of you who might know from the regions. Do any of your regions have them?
We do have some, and we have them listed on our regional integrated report. And then when we went to look at the state board's integrated report, they all show up as in category 5. So we were wanting to know if there's some way that those can be distinguished as 5 alts or somehow differently.
Right, let's think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I was just, Cynthia's question, which was, are there any other 5 alts that are out there in California?
Rebecca, this is Deborah. Board 5 has 5 alt for pesticides, so if it's being met by another regulatory program, such as your irrigated lands regulatory program, then that's a 5.
We call those 4Bs.
Oh, 4Bs. Oh, gosh, okay, sorry.
And there is a difference and there is a distinction between
Yeah,
5
that's
alt and
right.
4B, but I'm not going to go into that right now unless you guys really want me to.
We're working on some, but I know that Region 2 has the San Vicente and Fitzgerald Marine
Okay.
Preserve, right?
Okay, so there definitely are a
I
few,
thought that
and
was a
Barbara, I
5 alt.
saw that you were kind of. All right, we'll come back to that in a minute. I want to get to Jason first.
This is just kind of a technical one because we have a situation where there's a TMDL, so it would be 4A for a contaminant, but that contaminant now meets the objectives. But since they never get rid of, EPA never gets rid of a TMDL, it can technically never be 1 because it's always going to be 4A because it's a 303D listing that's approved TMDL.
So
It's like the technical.
our goal is to attain standards, right? The goal of the TMDL is to attain our water quality objectives and protect our uses. So the TMDL probably should not be removed once you attain your standards because that TMDL's implementation actions are helping and probably remain necessary in order to then continue to attain those standards after you do, improve the water quality. So, but if you do improve the water quality and you attain your standards, you can move that water body into a category 1 or 2 as appropriate, but the TMDL would still remain in place. Yeah,
Do you want me to adjust Barbara's question?
sure.
Okay.
Yes, actually, yes. Very much so.
I'm not Dave, but so I'm going to give you the answer that I think is right, and you can go back to Dave to make sure it's right. So 4B is you have a program in place, right? That's going to take care of it. That's 4B, right? You've identified that you have, some program that and you have a pretty good idea that it's going to take that problem, make it go away. That's 4B. 5 alt is sort of like, I have a plan to bring this water body into attainment, right? So that's the difference, right? 5 alt can be, I'm going to get halfway there, and then we can talk again. That's 5 alt.
And to add to that, if I may, the you have a plan, and there's a way to fix it in 4B. More specifically, that it's a regulatory requirement, and it needn't be promulgated or established by the water boards. It can be established by any other agency, but it's something that you have to identify and describe the basis for which that regulation, municipal code ordinance, or whatever the requirement is reasonably likely to redress the impairment, such that a TMDL is not necessary.
Yeah, there's a reasonable assurance kind of threshold that you need to be able to make with a 4B that you don't necessarily have to have with a 5 alt.
That's
The
right.
higher bar. All right, any other questions on the listing process? I'm going to then talk about what happens after you have a water body that you've determined to be impaired. It's on category 5. We've heard a little bit today that means that you either do an alternate restoration program in which to address the impairment, or you do a TMDL. And a TMDL really is the primary mechanism. I think we've done quite a lot of TMDLs. I should have brought the number of TMDLs that California has already completed. It's quite a few, and I would say most of our high priority impaired waters now have a TMDL in place for them. And the ones that don't are the ones that we're really, really having a hard time addressing, or they're just not, frankly, as high of a priority because we're now putting our TMDL development resources into implementing the ones that we've already developed. But I wanted to kind of go through a little bit of the process from our impaired waters policy, because again, there's a policy for that. of how do we address our impaired waters. There's a handout, one sheet of this flow chart that you guys should have, yeah, I see you guys have it. So this comes right out of our impaired waters policy. And I want to kind of walk through a few of these processes and concepts just a little bit. The top half of the flow chart is going to probably be very familiar to you because it talks a lot about what we've been talking about this week. It's talking about if your standard is actually not the right standard, what do you do about it? Once you have an impairment, kind of the first step after you get an impairment is to kind of do a little bit more of a specific watershed or reach scale investigation. And you kind of start by looking at your standard. Is the water quality objective appropriate? Is the use probable but not really being used? All of that starts really being, I have found that the regions really start putting their time and resources into understanding what's going on at a watershed specific level after you get that impairment. You prioritize which impairments you're going to be really looking at, and then you start looking at the standards first. You look at the data that you have that led to the listing. Does it justify an exceedance? Is there other data out there that may not have been considered when you did your 303 delisting? So this whole first half of the flow chart kind of really hopefully takes you through some of those thought processes, some of those questions about whether or not, you know, is the cause of the impairment because the standard should be changed, or is it because the standard is right and there are anthropogenic causes associated with it? And in fact, before you even go into looking at the cause, you're looking at, again, potentially assessing more data than was assessed in your initial 303D list to confirm the listing. And then you get your whole water quality standards kind of thought process here that we've covered this week in case you want to do a standards actions change because you may really not have an impaired water body. Yeah, this came out before the variance came through. I think this is a 2005 document, and so yeah, I think variance would be one of the considerations to have in here. Exactly where it would fit, I need to kind of think about a little bit. And then you kind of come down into looking at whether or not the cause of the impairment is pollution, or if it is a pollutant, because we would only calculate a TMDL, the loading capacity. I think this box, in fact, I think this box really should be the kind of the TMDL. You really only go into the TMDL process for pollutants and not for pollution. And then comes the big process of developing an appropriate implementation plan, an appropriate remedy for that, for the problem that you've identified. So, TMDL implementation in California. I just want to emphasize again how cool California is because we have an obligation to do implementation with our TMDLs. We have the 13242 requirement of the California Water Code saying that we need to have that program of implementation to achieve our water quality objectives. We have quite a few TMDLs that were developed because of consent decree deadlines that were promulgated by the US EPA, and those don't have implementation plans, but the ones that California has developed and put through our process do. The US EPA's regulations do not provide for US EPA approval of those implementation plans, because again, it's under California authority. But the federal regs do require implementation of a TMDL for point sources, as you guys learned this week, because MPDS permits must be consistent with the assumptions and requirements of TMDL and any waste load allocations that are incorporated in them. So on the point source side, we're kind of covered, but not really on the non-point source side. And so TMDL implementation really is, especially for non-point sources, largely a function of California law. and because of 13242, that requires that program of implementation.
Hey, Rebecca, may I add to that?
Of course.
So the extra cool thing about California is that 13242 requires a program of implementation to be established to achieve and maintain water quality objectives. And what that means is that we can develop a program of implementation before the water body is impaired. And so oftentimes we think as a TMDL as a 13242 is sort of synonymous, but a TMDL and its implementation components is one type of program of implementation. So just wanted to clarify that point.
That's right. That's why sometimes we go straight to implementation and don't do a TMDL first, because we already have all the authority that we need in order to address the sources that might be contributing to an impaired water body.
Yeah. And an example would be the trash plan, the statewide trash plan. The program of implementation in there is actually the manner in which a prohibition is implemented after the prohibition was established. And so for waters that are impaired by trash and not impaired by trash, that prohibition and its implementation components relates to all of those waters. When a regional board and the state water board determines that a particular water body is in fact impaired by trash, well, does a TMDL need to be established? And the answer is no. That water body impaired by trash would be classified as in 4B, and the regulatory component that is redressing that trash impairment is the trash prohibition that was established by the state rulemaking. So that's the interplay with those elements.
Right. It really is quite incredible the amount of ability that the regional water board has, a lot of discretion to figure out what needs to be done and use the authorities that we have available to do that in order to address our impairments. And really, even after you have a TMDL, it's using our existing regulatory authority in which to implement it. So with that said, let's go back to the flow chart and look at the bottom half of it, which really kind of looks at what some of those regulatory options that we have available to us kind of consist of. All right. So we can address an impairment by a single vote of the regional water board. Some examples of when this happens is when we issue an individual permit or a waste discharge requirement or an MPDS permit or a waiver of a WDR. If in doing so you can say that, oh, we are now fixing the sources of the problem and we're going to solve the impairment. And this can be an individual permit, it can be a general permit, but it's one action of the board. Another type of single action can be, okay, same thing. You got issue or revise. Hey, look, I said both, individual or general permit. It can be via an enforcement action or an interagency agreement. And I assume there are some others that I can't think of right now. Usually it is the permit, an issuance or a renewal of a permit that provides that single action mechanism. You can also address an impairment by certifying that a regulatory agency of another local, state, or federal agency, a regulatory program really, of another local, state, or federal agency, or a non-regulatory program of one of those agencies is sufficient to say that the source of the problem is going to be addressed. And then you kind of got most of what really happens, where the cause of the problem is multiple. There are a lot of things that are happening within a watershed that really are causing the impairment, a combination of different types of non-point sources or point and non-point sources. And because of our Administrative Procedures Act, we need to have an opportunity for all of the players that are interested and involved with these regulations to be able to understand what they all are at one point in time. And so that's why we do the rulemaking that I think we're all somewhat familiar with in the form in the form of a basin plan amendment or an amendment to a statewide water quality control plan. And that's what that says. So you adopt an amendment that guides staff in implementing the TMDLs. And really what it often is a plan to a plan, or a plan to say we're going to do this to this permit, we're going to do that to that permit, we're going to do a voluntary agreement or cooperative agreement with the U.S. Forest Service or whoever the interested party is, and we're going to do X, Y, and Z in this period of time, and we're going to circle back to it, and we're going to do these monitoring requirements. That's typically the way our TMDLs look. Any questions or examples on that? Yeah, Nadeem.
So one example for Region 7, I think we did the first one where we adopted a single action by the board with our general order for Palo Verde Valley. That's when we adopted the TMDL inside the order for DDT and toxaphene in Palo Verde. So, and our board adopted it like a few months, 2 months ago.
Yeah.
But when you do one of those, again, it's always a good idea to check with the US EPA representatives. And that's what we did regarding the TMDL throughout the process. And we get their kind of informal blessing for what we did.
That's hugely important. I'm going to go into procedures just a little bit. I didn't think I'd spend too much time in like the adopting procedures, but for a single action permit type of adoption, like the ag order in Palo Verde Valley, I think that's right, Palo Verde Valley, that is not subject to State Water Board consideration the way that a basin plan amendment is subject. So that TMDL is not going to come to the State Board. It's going to go directly to EPA for consideration on the TMDL approval end. So it's just a little side note. The basin plan amendments, any amendment to one of your water quality control plans, not only needs to be approved at the regional board level, but also at the State Water Board level. Ed?
I just wondered where in this flow chart the vision, EPA vision might fit in. So for the regions that are working on vision projects.
So it doesn't, well, I'll just let Terry.
Yeah, so this was done in 2005, right? The vision happened like in 2012.
So vision waters.
Understood, but just in the schematic, where would it fit in if we were going to edit it?
So first of all, vision waters are waters that we have identified. They're impaired waters that we have identified and prioritized to address by September 30th, 2022, have EPA approval on whatever action we are taking to address by that date. And so we would need to, so we have a listing that we're prioritizing for addressing. So it may be that we delist because we find more information and it's no longer a problem. We may take it through a standards action to revise the standard, or it may be that you drop down into the TMDL development world. And I would suspect that every region knows exactly what they're going to do with their vision waters at this point. They're either, my understanding, if I can remember the list of them all, they are either going to be a traditional TMDL or it's an TMDL alternative, a restoration plan type approach that they are developing. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I think you got it right.
Everybody pretty much, I think we all pretty much identified vision waters that we were already working on that we had a pretty good sense we would complete by that 2022 date so that we would all look good on the performance measures end.
Yeah, let me give you a little bit of history on the vision. So back in the old days where we had consent decrees, it was like work, get these things done. And then, the consent decrees were over, and the vision was all about making sure that states identified their high priority waters. The highest priority is to do, TMDLs or some other action. So that was one piece. The other piece were states were working really, really hard and not getting it done, and so they wanted some partial credit for working on these water bodies, and that was the other piece of the vision. So it still fits within the flow chart. It's just sort of a prioritization issue rather than something else.
Okay, good question. All right, so these are just where you can find both the policy that I pulled the flow chart from, as well as a guidance document that was developed concurrent with the policy. So again, it's 2005. It's seeing its age a little bit, but it does include for California some good guidance for if you're getting into the traditional TMDL world, referencing back to EPA guidance, how to do a problem statement, source analysis, develop your allocations, linkage analysis, margins of safety, all of those different components that we need to have in TMDLs. There's some good guidance for that at a statewide level that is available at that link. And then this is almost all I was planning to touch on, the procedures that we go through when we are developing a basin plan amendment or a TMDL. I just recognize that all of the steps that we have to take from the peer review to CEQA, functional equivalence document development, there's a lot more deadlines associated with noticing for our hearings and adoption consideration meetings. There's some guidance on economic analysis that we have. There are, I think as you guys all know who have done this, it takes a lot of time and there are a lot of steps that we need to make sure that we are aware of and that we do accurately. I think that the most times when we're challenged with litigation on any of our actions, they tend to challenge us on our procedural process before they challenge us on the technical content of what we're proposing, because it's kind of a cut and dry, did we or did we not do what we're required to do? So it is definitely important that we also are aware of all the steps that we have to do along the way. I would refer you guys, if you want more training on this, to some of the classes that are online on the Training Academy's website that Rick Rasmussen and John Marshak have given over previous years. I suspect we'll probably revive one of those trainings in some form in the next year or two after toxicity is off the desk. But so that's just something, we do have resources out there, and it is definitely quite a, just be aware that there is a lot that you all need to be aware of as you're doing an amendment. We have the wiki, which is really going to be helpful for when you guys have already approved an amendment and are bringing it up through the state board level. That is probably, most of the information on that wiki is associated with that step of the process. There is the old administrative procedures manual that still is out there that does walk you through more comprehensively what you need, starting with your administrative record, all the way through, and now we are in the process of trying to update that administrative procedures manual. And it is starting to take the form of this wiki, which is really looking at procedures and guidance for doing any sort of water quality control plan or policy amendment. I want to make sure you guys realize that as we are developing this, we are really trying to keep moving forward. So we're not looking at the whole possible universe of plans and policy amendment projects. We are really focusing on statewide ones for DWQ purposes here at the State Water Board, because we just need to keep getting something done. So, but I think that there's going to be a lot of relevance to what you do at the regions on this wiki, so I want to make sure you're aware of it. And if I have some time at the end, I'm actually going to pull it up. We have a few sections that have been completed, more are underway. The first one that's really helpful is on board meetings and at least at the statewide level, lays out our legal requirements for what we need to do when we bring an item to the State Water Board. It includes example documents and includes templates for agenda items, agenda language, and other things. So we're really trying to provide a place so we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we do a new water quality control plan or policy project. The next one that we're working on is going to be notice requirements, which will apply to everybody. And we're really close to having that out on the street for everybody to use. How many days before a hearing, adoption meeting, you need to put a notice out, does it have to go newspaper or not, all those kind of requirements. And Stacy has been getting gold stars left and right for her work on this. Go ahead.
The other issue that's coming and will be posted soon on that wiki is a narrative description of what a resolution is, why we need it, what it does, what's its function, and all the things that we kind of roll through. We're going to have a document that actually expressly explains it in detail.
And that's sitting on my desk. I'll eventually
And
look at that.
That's correct.
Okay, and then I wanted to touch at least a little bit on working with tribes. I got to say I was a little kind of disappointed that we didn't have any tribal representatives joining us here today. I've worked with a few of them, and I think that it was nice to see the list of the tribes with status as a state yesterday and which ones have the water quality control plans. That was certainly informative to me. But as we develop our all of the work that we do when we're looking at standards, when we're looking at TMDLs, when we're at 303D lists, triennial reviews, we really need to be out and involving all of the tribes in California, regardless of whether or not they're considered equal as a state, if they're federally recognized or if they're not federally recognized. It's on us to make sure that we are reaching out to them and getting their input and considering aspects of water quality really that I don't think we may not normally consider, especially things like full submersion ceremonies, higher rates of consumption, gathering shellfish for consumption that might not, or for artwork, reeds for artwork. There's a lot of uses that I think are unique to tribes that is just not maybe something that we've thought of in the past as we've developed all of the uses and objectives that we have currently in place. So with that said, there is a really lovely intranet wiki site, so again, just to the water boards, that Gita Kapai and her office have put together for us to help us in our work with tribes. It includes the AB 52 formal CEQA consultation guidance. This is only when we're doing a CEQA action, but also just more broadly when we should be having discussions and working with tribes. And a nice map, too, of where all the tribes in California are. And there really are quite a lot that are just not recognized with the federal status. And then, Robert, since you're here, I'll just highlight the fact that I really appreciate how much you're starting to kind of step up into helping us facilitate a working group within the water boards on some tribal beneficial use identification efforts. And it may expand, but right now we're really kind of looking at designating beneficial uses to some of our relatively new tribal beneficial use definitions that came in when we developed the Mercury provisions as part 2 of the SWRCB. So just that is something that is ongoing. If you guys are starting to look at the beneficial uses for your basin plans, I certainly welcome you guys sending a representative to that workshop, to that work group. It's really a work group. It's not a workshop.
Yeah, should I say anything? Or?
Yes, if you want to, go for it, please.
Yeah, we have so we are putting together a tribal beneficial uses work group. Again, I'm Robert LaRue with the Central Valley region. We have our first conference call is July 8th, is a Monday, and we are trying to get something together. We were invited to speak, regions were invited to speak about the progress of tribal beneficial uses within our own basin plans and getting that implemented. At the last RTAC meeting, and the acronym escapes me, Regional Tribal, I can't remember, something committee, operations committee perhaps, was held by US EPA Region 9 in San Francisco, but then there's a separate section that was hosted by one of the tribes in the Central Valley region, Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. Sarah Ryan, any of you may be familiar with her, invited us to speak on the status of tribal beneficial uses in Region 5 and other regions as well. We weren't able to attend. I believe Gita attended on behalf of the water boards, but we're trying to, if invited, meet at the next RTAC meeting, which would be in July. So that's kind of set up this first conference call. And then we have another conference call that was previously scheduled. It's going to be on the 15th. I have a number of regions that have identified staff that are participating. Specifically in Region 6, a big help to me has been Cindy Wise. So a number of others as well. But
Absolutely.
just wanted to give that shout out a little bit. So feel free to email me, contact me if you want to stop me after for my contact information. If you want to be part of that, or if you have staff that want to be part of that, I'd be happy to
Robert.
reach out.
All right, and that wraps it up for my presentation. One thing I'm going to share is kind of a tangent, but I was thinking about earlier today is we've just spent this week getting real familiar with section numbers. And I just want to put out kind of a personal request that we really try to limit the use of that nomenclature when we're out and about in the world. Try not to say we're talking about 101 4C waters or the 303D list or 404, 401 permitting, but let's try to use it. We're talking about dredge or fill discharges to surface waters. We're talking about impaired waters. We're talking about fishable, swimmable. I think it really is. I'm finding the need to step away from those section numbers more and more in almost all of my discussions, be it with my board members, with other program staff who have no idea what I'm talking about, and certainly with the public. So it's just, I think it's really helpful for us to use the shorthand when we're all amongst each other, but we gotta really start paying attention to the words that we use and how we describe the good work that we do when we get out into the world. And I just want to say how much I've enjoyed this week. I really appreciate EPA and bringing this to California. There's been a few mornings that I've been getting ready in my own house going, oh, I'm so glad I have not had to travel. So I appreciate all of you that have had to travel to come here. At least we didn't have to spend 5 hours in a plane, though, to get here. And just, you know, anybody I think is welcome to follow the TMDL and basin planning roundtables. A lot of the material that we talk about this week is discussed over various meetings in those two roundtable forums. And it's a good place just to stay current and, you know, we have fun too, So thank you, everybody. I'm going to hang around for a little bit if you have any more questions. Deborah, you wanted to add something?
I want to just say thank you to everybody, too. And I think we forget one of our most valuable resource of information.
Each other.
So, you know, we can't keep all this in our head. So, you know, now you know where some of those materials are or who to talk to, and that's what's very important. Last point is, when will the tape materials be available online, do you anticipate?
You know what, I have no idea. I don't know, Hal, if you have any thought process. We'll need to work with Water Board Academy. There's going to be, I'm sure, some editing and some matchup of the material with the slides. I have absolutely no idea how long it's going to take, but we can certainly, we'll let everybody know once it is available.
Maybe 4 weeks. Great, thank you.
3 to 4 weeks? 4 weeks? Well, that's great, actually.
About 30 days, give or take.
Yeah, okay. 30 days is what I'm hearing. Yep. All right. I will admit that we had to move our office, right? Because our floor is being remodeled, and I was packing. I had the 2008 version going at one point just to try to the UAA stuff. I don't know if I'm ever going to completely wrap my head around. All right. Thank you all very, very much. Really appreciate it.